Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Kepp, a co-founder of From Day One, our forum on corporate values, and we're looking forward to hosting today's webinar. But before I introduce our moderator, I want to share something special we have for attendees of today's webinar. Our next monthly virtual conference is coming up on Wednesday, July 21st, and it's titled Diversity's Many Roles: How Mentors, Sponsors, and Allies Each Play a Part in Inclusion. Thanks to our partners and today's sponsor, we have some complimentary VIP tickets available for those who've joined today's webinar. That's you. I'm putting a link in the chat right now, and you'll want to take advantage of this one. The regular price for our conference tickets is $149, and this link will give you a free VIP ticket for the whole day's activities. And now on to today's webinar. We'll be exploring a topic that focuses on team motivation, but not just any teams. Our title for today's session is The Need to Exceed: Harnessing Motivation Within Ultra-High Performance Teams. Research has shown that intrinsic motivation is key to maximizing employee satisfaction, engagement, and productivity. But do the same rules apply for professionals operating at the upper limits of human ability? From fighter pilots to Olympic athletes, how do motivational needs differ when it comes to teams like these? And what tools and techniques do leaders use to drive their elite charges to bold new heights? Our sponsor today is Attuned. I'll tell you a little bit about them. Drawing on decades of academic research into the psychology behind intrinsic motivation, Attuned's AI-powered software makes the hidden values that drive people visible. This allows managers to understand their teams on a whole new level, offering insights and actions to enhance communication, to boost engagement and productivity, and ultimately to make work more meaningful. Now, a few quick logistical items before we start. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand soon after the event, so you can look out for an email in about 24 hours with the link. That email will also have info on how you can get professional development credits for this session from the Society of Human Resource Management. And look out for a written account of the conversation soon on our website at fromdayone.co. At the top of the hour, we'll begin a Q&A session. You can submit your questions at any time during the webinar using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our moderator of distinction, Lydia Dishman, a staff editor for Fast Company, who's an expert on such topics as technology, leadership, and the workplace. She has written for CBS Money Watch, Fortune, Popular Science, and the New York Times, among others. Okay, Lydia, take it away.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks everybody for joining us today. We have a really interesting discussion teed up. I'm really excited about it. When I think about ultra high performing teams, it's hard for me not to think about NASA, and I'm sure many of you would agree that particularly the team responsible for Apollo 11, not just the astronauts, but the whole cohort, is a pretty key example. Similarly, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to interview Dr. John Gretzinger, the chief scientist and head of strategic planning for the Mars rover mission at NASA. And I talked to him about unique management strategies for motivating and collaborating with hundreds of staff members across 13 countries, all operating under extreme pressure. And at that time, he explained the best practice approach of test as you fly and fly as you test, that not only resulted in risk reduction, but allowed his team to confront those challenges that actually made history. So I'm sure while none of you gathered here today, well, I assume that you're planning an expedition to space, the work of bringing together and nurturing ultra-high performers is just as critical to your organization's success as landing that Mars rover. And some days it probably feels as complex. So to discuss the best practices, we've assembled a stellar, pun intended, group of professionals to share their experience and insight. So we're gonna go around the room. I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves, tell us about your work, and also give us your definition of an ultra high performer using only 3 words. Bonus points if you wanna say how that differs between just a regular high performer. So Casey, why don't we start with you?
All right, so let me go with the 3 words to begin with. I would say, of course, results has to be there, I think. Then consistency, an alignment. And that alignment, I think, is kind of cheating because I have to explain it a little bit, is alignment with the culture and alignment with the objectives and the goals of the company. And differentiation between ultra high performers and high performers is probably the level of all of those. Are they doing everything at the ultimate level? So going to the introduction, I'm Casey. I'm one of the founders of Attuned. We're an intrinsic motivation software. So it's backed by deep psychology. We have a big team of psychologists. And really it is showing what was previously invisible is individuals' intrinsic motivations. And now you can kind of see this. So you can see the interpersonal interactions, the gaps, so teams can work better and managers can create a more psychologically safe environment.
Thank you. That's stellar right out of the gate. Matt, why don't you go next?
Sure, sounds good. Thank you, Lydia. I just changed jobs and I'm a psychologist. I'm curious if they were industrial organizational psychologists that work with Casey. I am an industrial organizational psychologist. I currently work for Becton Dickinson, a medical technology company, about 72,000 employees, 120 years old, and our claim to fame is inventing the silver age. I've been with the company for 3 years. Just recently, I joined the diversity and inclusion team, and I was previous to that helping identify our high potentials, high performers in the talent management space. When I think about the definition of high performer, I can't do it in 3 words. I would say it's a person that consistently exceeds expectations. So I do have consistency, just like Casey does, and those are the 3 words I would use for high performer. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Nick, how about you go next before you get sucked into that great beyond behind you?
Nick Allen, I'm from Gensler. Gensler is a global design firm, actually the world's largest global design firm that has such projects as like Shanghai Tower, build new education campuses for universities, healthcare systems, et cetera. My role is I'm a talent development leader for our Midwest region. You know, thinking about the definition of high performance, 3 words that come to mind would be inspired, focused, and empowered. And I say inspired and empowered instead of inspirational and empowering. So I think first you have to be inspired and empowered. See, that's one of the bigger gaps before you can really provide that level of leadership to others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sort of within versus without, talking about intrinsic motivation there. Thank you, Nick. That's an important context. Janet, how about you go next?
Thank you, Lydia. Hi, everyone. My name is Janet Ghosh. I am currently the HR Director for Global Supply Management function at Stanley Black Decker. Now, this is a corporate functions with teams spread across globally. I have been with the company for 13 years, 10 years managing HR in the emerging markets, mainly Middle East and Africa, based out of Dubai. Prior to Stanley Black Decker, I was with Siemens for 8 years, managing HR in different roles in the lower Gulf region. So I've worked in 5 countries and love the challenge of working with diverse teams, expanding my horizons and learning every day. Most recently, I became a Marshall Goldsmith certified coach. So for me, a high performer is someone who's resilient, innovative, and agile.
Yeah, resilience, that's a big one I often hear when it comes to high performer. Okay, last but not least, Captain Paul.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I currently work for Kodiak Air Company. I'm the Director of Special Missions and Flight Operations here. I spent 26 years as a naval aviator. I flew fighters, and I was in command of a couple fighter squadrons while I was in. I would say the biggest trait that I find in high performance teams would be motivation, self-aware, and accountable, which is really important in the business that I was in. But the big difference for the high performing, ultra high performing, were the level of attention to detail that they expressed.
Attention to detail. Yeah, so we have a lot of good words. I wish I had a whiteboard behind me so I could write these all down. We could have a word cloud. But at any rate, you're all coming from very different types of organizations, different perspectives, obviously. So I'm curious, and this is a question for all of you, what has been your experience with high-performing individuals over the last 18 months? And by this, I want to take into account the context of this last year and all of the challenges that it brought. So Paul, I'm going to go back to you first. We're going to go back around to the way we came.
Sure. I think really the biggest challenge over the last year was the remote nature of work. We were about 250 people in our company. 3/4 of them were remote. It is very difficult to lead in your traditional methods while people are remote. And so you don't know what's going on really at their home. And I found it really difficult to inspire, to address timelines, to read body language of these people that maybe you would be able to pick up on at work. So I think the biggest challenge really was your traditional leadership methods have had to really shift to something that is more digital. And I think that was a huge challenge for us.
Mm-hmm. But did you notice that the individuals themselves were behaving any differently in response to this shift in leadership? You were all learning together?
So the behavior part is really difficult to tell over a video teleconference.
Mm-hmm.
Email, I absolutely abhor email because I think it's a poor form of communication. You can't tell tone, you can't tell emotion in it, or sometimes you can read emotion that's not in it. So
Right.
yeah, it was a real challenge to kind of address the needs of the individual. And people are not homogenous in the way you lead them. So you have to know each individual and train your leadership methods accordingly. And that's very, very difficult when you're not interacting with them day to day. So how did we get over that?
Well, that's to be discussed.
Yep.
Thank you for that. Janet?
So I think the last 18 months, according to me, changed the dynamics on how we measure and manage performance in this VUCA world, right? So VUCA, we all know, stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. The acronym was first coined in the US Army and is now increasingly used in business.
Yes, it is.
So organizations and teams have had to pivot from their traditional ways of working, which worked well for them in the past, into a more creative and sometimes radically different way of working, right? So individuals who are agile and made that shift are the ones who not only survived, but they also thrived. So what are some of the common traits these individuals have? So according to me and what we have experienced in our organization is they have the courage to innovate and do things differently. They are agile in the way they think and work. They're inclusive and collaborate well, both internally and externally. And they're highly resilient and they're problem solvers. So there could be other traits, but according to me, these were the main traits that differentiated the high performers from the rest.
Oh, especially, I mean, resilience is like the name of the game over this last year, right? So,
Absolutely.
yeah, and being able to pivot sometimes in 5 minutes. So, okay, awesome. Nick, what have you experienced over the last year?
So, being at a global design firm, so we have the designers that we hire, that creative, entrepreneurial design spirit is something that is just intuitively part of who they are. So the past year, what has been really amazing to see, the whole world is kind of at a standstill and almost frozen, like on what do we do? How do we move forward? Like, how do we continue to reopen the workplace or to reopen educational facilities or medical facilities, what that's going to look like? How do we design to that? The folks that really showed up as our highest performers are those that really embrace that level of spirit and showed up as thought partners, both internally and externally, to the organization, and helping to really lead conversations and what that looks like, and help kind of unlock that for clients and for others that were just stuck, and what that looks like.
I like the partnership aspect of that. Collaboration is also very key. Matt, what have you seen?
when I think about those people that truly stepped up, so there's this group of folks that are high performers, high potential, and then there's this subset during COVID that stepped up versus the ones that faltered. When we think about the ones that stepped up, those are the ones, one word comes to mind, and it's just the ones that were authentic. That authenticity created a sense of belonging within the team. Authenticity leads to sort of an empathetic type individual as well, which then builds on, we had talked before this panel a little bit about trust, those sort of the foundational elements of trust, but it was those folks that were just, they were so authentic. That was the one characteristic I noticed about the ones that stepped up during COVID versus the ones that were hypos that might have slightly faltered.
And somewhat side note to this, wonder if there was some surprises around that. This is before I get to Casey with this same question, but did you expect these particular people to show up at this level?
Not necessarily. It's funny you should say that, Lydia, because there were some that, unfortunately, in the 20 years of being in the business, a lot of the folks that sort of float to the top, they're not always the nicest folks. They're tough and they get there through grit, and sometimes there's a little bit of a trail of destruction. Whereas the ones that floated up to the top during COVID were the ones that were actually kind and nice and did it in a way that was not rude and sort of help their colleagues along. They're the ones that got discretionary effort as leaders. They're the ones that were able to break boundaries, speed up where necessary. I mean, being that we make syringes at Becton Dickinson, we were fairly imperative to get this right really, really quick. We created a 15-minute test, so we had to get people to move faster than they ever have. And it was those folks that were just, they were just nice and honest and real and authentic that won the race.
Well, that's wonderful to hear because, of course, we always, heard the adage, nice guys finish last, nice girls too. So I'm glad to hear that. Okay, Casey, your turn.
Yeah, I think as much as it was difficult and horrendous, like from a leadership point of view over the last 18 months, we had a common challenge. It was clear we were all kind of facing it. So, as Nick was alluding to, like, I think I work in a high performing team and I'm very grateful for the high performing members around me, but we led transparently and it was quite open. So, people could contribute ideas and we could pivot and we could be more agile, as Janet mentioned earlier. And, as Matt was just talking there, we, in this world of Zoom, where in some ways it's a little bit more democratic, where everybody's kind of the same size square here, maybe people who didn't raise their voice before, they could raise it here. And through their authenticity and kindness as well, they start to get people to follow them too. So I think those were some of the nice things of existing in a high performing team over the last 18 months was good. But I think going forward, it's going to be quite challenging for many organizations. We're starting to see statistics of more than 50% of people want to leave their jobs. And I'm making an assumption that many of them are going to be very high performers who have more options. And how do we as leaders and how do we as HR address this now? And of course, they might be looking outside because of the decisions, because of some of the things that we made over the last 18 months as well. So I think this is going to be a very particular challenge that we're going to have to deal with for quite some time.
Well, I'm always thinking about skills and assessment, and certainly over the course of my reporting on, hiring trends, there's been sort of this shift that's been coming slowly, and I think it did nothing but turn into a tsunami this last year, where the soft skills, the emotional intelligence was definitely something that was looked for before, but now certainly is integral to a good hire. So what have you changed about how you assess these potential for high performance now? Are you incorporating more of the soft skills in those assessments? Janet, you want to take this one first?
Yes, of course. So there have always been these traditional skill sets we were looking at, right? When we are hiring, the talent acquisition team was aware of it. You know, your employer branding and everything depended on it, right? There was some skill sets that became even more relevant now in the current environment. You know, to an extent, strategic orientation. It's this ability to look at the big picture. You know, where you are, what is your strategy, and you know, what is your role relative to that big picture. So that became very, very important, more so now in this remote world. Of course, I mentioned innovation mindset, this creativity, doing things differently, challenging status quo, that became very important. And that's what we were looking at in our hires. The change management aptitude, right? Ability to kind of absorb and embrace change, that became very important. Also, to an extent, data-driven thinking. Data is a king today, right? In order to establish that credibility, you know, data-driven thinking became very, very important. It was before, but most so in the current world, I would think. And the digital DNA. And I think we mentioned it, right? We are in a Zoom world now. And it all started off with, how do we get to breakout rooms? What is annotate and all that? But now it's become second nature to everybody. So these skill sets are important. And Lydia, you mentioned emotional intelligence. Now, yes. Emotional intelligence is extremely important. Beyond emotional intelligence, we are also looking at social intelligence that includes emotional intelligence, but goes beyond that in the sense that, you know, it's about active listening skills. It's about this heightened level of empathy and situational sensitivity. Yes. So I think that became very, very important. That's what we look at in individuals and leaders when we hire today.
Paul, what are you looking for that indicate future success?
Yeah, I think the emotional intelligence piece is huge, and it's been around for a while. You just probably have masked it in different ways, but somebody who can be, you know, self-aware, self-regulate, and has empathy for other people, that's hard to hire, right? It's because each individual has their own emotional signal, right? So it's very unique to that individual. So when you're in the hiring process, I haven't seen anything that you can say, ask questions or give scenarios that would give good indicators of emotional intelligence. But I think it's something that you have to learn over time into that person and understand that's the characteristic that you need to really bring out in that person. The empathy piece was huge in my last line of work, because, you know, you had people that were from the higher levels of the pay scale down to, you know, folks that could barely get by, and you had to understand their level with empathy and lead to that. It's very difficult, but I think it's probably one of the most important characteristics that has come out in hiring recently is that emotional intelligence. And we really strive to find those kinds of people, but they're very few and far between, because people tend to put on a different facade when you're interviewing. And I think they probably try to answer how you think they would want to answer, not necessarily what's in their true emotion.
Matt, I want to come to you next on this, because Paul really just set me thinking about specific assessments and what a hiring process looks like to find people with soft skills. Is there, you know, something beyond the behavioral interview questions that people can do?
There's that, and then of course we think about those objective assessments beyond just the interview. The different companies offering assessments into what is the potential of this individual. In looking through and talking to some of my colleagues, so other PhDs in industrial organizational psychology, and researching, oh my goodness, we have a stake in the ground. There's the world of work pre-COVID versus post-COVID. What is this going to look like? It's unprecedented. We've heard this over and over again, but from a research standpoint, when we used to do research around virtual work meant, hi, I'm on the phone. It was interesting, Captain Paul, when you were saying that there's body language missing. At BD, we were forced to quickly get on to Zoom, use Teams. And the company, 120 years old, did not want to go on camera. And it took some sort of convincing that this isn't a nice to have. You miss so much of the communication when you're just on the phone.
Yeah, just on the phone.
Yeah, and all the research, when they talk about virtual work, it's this. Well, that's not what we have today. We have this.
Mhm.
Is that ineffective? Well, there's certain situations where it's not great. Things such as when you first join, creating a network, a little harder to do. Secondly, when you're giving negative feedback, a little bit harder to yell at someone, for instance, when you're on Zoom. And the third one, heavy brainstorming. They've got Muriel and all kinds of technology, but I think there's still a way to go. So there's 3 areas. There's 80% of work if you're a person who works literally at a desk in front of a computer. It's unprecedented whether it's just effective virtual or not. We don't have research necessarily around that. And so the assessments to determine whether someone has high potential or is a high performer based on past research. So we're entering into a whole new world and sort of thinking through what is that going to look like post-COVID, this whole hybrid world. I think we don't have a whole lot of assessments yet that are crafted for the future just yet, because it was just, nobody would have expected this to happen. Yeah. It's like, oh,
I realize I'm asking sort of the crystal ball question because everyone is going to be facing some sort of upheaval. But Nick, do you have something to add here? What you're doing?
I think a lot of what I would add has already been said. Maybe the only other piece, I mean, part of looking at high potential is looking at learning agility. And I think that piece has even come out stronger over the past year, that being able to really take on new challenges and new pieces of kind of unknown ahead of us and quickly distill it, make sense of it, be able to move forward is something that is becoming even more important now.
Mm-hmm. Finally, Casey, do you have something to add about data analytics assessments? How do we indicate future success?
Yeah, of course. That's what we run here. So I think I could add a lot on that. So one of the things that we have within Attuned is an intrinsic motivation assessment, which is looking at somebody's value hierarchy at work. So how are they going to consistently, what decisions do they consistently make, and how does that match up to the goals that they have? So, you know, going back to kind of EQ and how it's measured, how Captain Paul was saying it was difficult to measure on the door in, like what we have many of our customers using kind of the Attuned intrinsic motivator assessment to understand people's value sets and to understand people's intrinsic motivations before they join their teams and before they, you know, kind of get stuck in with their managers and see what are those dynamics and how those interpersonal kind of differences in values going to interplay. So you can start to have mutual understanding, which is, I think, the first building block towards compassion and getting that EQ. Just going on that point about hiring is, you know, we're only a 70-person organization and just hiring in like the 5s and the 10s over the last year. But midway through, we just changed one line in kind of our job descriptions. We said, we want people with a kind heart. Just a kind heart is kind of one of our requirements. And that seemed to get a really big emotional reaction from a lot of applicants. I don't know if you could do this at scale type of thing. You see on a lot of job descriptions, EQ skills and all these type of things like that, which aren't as human, but that a kind heart really kind of worked well for us. And I think kind of get some self-selection of getting kind people in the door as well.
I have a related question, but we're coming up on the half-hour mark, so I want to invite Steve back on to give a word from our sponsor again.
Sure. Thanks, Lydia. Hi, everyone. I'd just like to remind anyone joining our webinar in midstream that we're from day one, and we're exploring the need to exceed, harnessing motivation within ultra-high performance teams. Our sponsor is Attuned. As a reminder, you can submit your questions at any time, and we'll answer as many as we can during the Q&A session at the top of the hour. Now back to you, Lydia.
Thank you. So, okay, we're using a lot of very important words, I think, and assessments are always tricky. And I do, as I said, realize that this is a kind of crystal ball thing. But my related question is how you put people together. You're assessing for all of these qualities, but you also want to have some diversity because we know that diverse teams perform at much higher levels. And that's all factors of diversity. We've got race, we've got ethnicity, we've got gender, we've got everything, and including diversity of thought, neurodiversity. So what are some best practices for getting the right people together? Because it feels sometimes like a Rubik's Cube that you can't solve. Who wants to raise their hand first with that one? I've got two people. Go ahead, Paul.
Biggest challenge I think I saw was putting together a team was not listening to. So let me give you my background. Every 2.5 or 3 years, you'd step into a leadership position of a command. And a lot of times you would get a pass down of those people. I refused to pass down. I didn't want to know about the people from the perspective of the previous leadership. So everybody started off with a clean slate. So that way I can view for myself what the team actually looked like, and then arrange the team, right? So you don't always get the people that you want, but you have the people that you got, and you have to arrange them to be the most effective. So I would never take anybody's pass down on who was who and what they could do, because what you would find out is that those people may have been in a different perspective put into a position that they weren't suited for. So that was my first step into arranging to a high performance team. People that I could see for myself what skill sets they really portrayed that would benefit the team as a whole. That was my first start.
Janet, your best practice?
Yeah, so I think, according to me, to drive high performance, you need to get two things right? First is your talent management practice, and then is your performance management process. So that's, according to me, that's key. So talent management actually starts with talent acquisition, right? Attracting the best people, the best in class in the industry. And that again involves your branding strategy. And there's where D&I comes into play, right? So what is your diversity, equity, and inclusion policy? Once you hire best in class employees, do you effectively onboard them? Do you have mentors within the buddies within the system? And are they diverse buddies, right? That's important. So, and are you creating career paths for these people? So is your culture inclusive culture? Because even if you hire diverse people, if your culture is not inclusive, then it's not very useful. You lose them, right? So, and are you creating opportunities for growth within the organization, or are you, going outside every time there's a new position within the company? That's very important. Is your culture balanced between building your current talent and buying from the market? And sometimes borrow when you have these unique skill sets needed, right? So that's important. Again, the recognition and reward strategies is bringing out the best in people. That's important. Also the leaders. I think we mentioned a lot about empathy, right? I think empathy should be a non-negotiable trait for all leaders today. And that's how they bring in the best in class talent. They bring in diverse talent and they retain them. And also your interview panel should consist of diverse interviewers. That's very important. Otherwise, you will never have that talent pool and you will never get the best in class people. So I think it's a combination of a lot of things. And then there's feedback, there's coaching, there's mentorship and everything that the organization does to kind of ensure we develop people and we retain these best in class people. So it's not just one thing, but a combination of factors, I would say.
Okay. Matt, you wanted to take a stab at this one as well?
Yeah, when I think of getting that amazing team together that's truly diverse, they have all kinds of different ways of looking at things, there's a good chance they're not going to speak the same language, that there's going to be oil and water in the words they use and the way they communicate. There's a good chance there's going to be conflict. There's a good chance that there's going to be people that are a little quiet, and you gotta pull words out of them because they're a little introverted versus extroverted. And so there's this fabulous tapestry of conflicting perspectives and ways of communicating that is critical. right? If you want a truly diverse team. And so the ticket there for me, the most critical, I would say not even the glue bottle is the leader. It's that leader that can bring it all together. And I say glue bottle, not the glue, because maybe they'll find a person in the team. I don't know if any of you have ever pulled teams together or operated in teams where there's one person that can just talk to everybody. That could be the glue. It doesn't have to be the leader. The leader has to figure out who that glue is and put it in the glue bottle. But that leader, they're the one that's going to pull out the quiet voice. They're going to quell the conflict or pull it into a separate room, have it occur, and then come out with a sort of conclusion. They're going to translate when two people are saying the same thing, they're just saying it slightly differently. So my thought is the leader.
So the leader is the most crucial, and that person must have that emotional intelligence to bring these other people strengths out. Is that what you're saying?
Because you want people to speak a different language. You want them to not understand each other. That's what makes them, otherwise you have groupthink. Everybody's all the same.
Yeah, no, definitely ultra high performance does not equate groupthink. Nick, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so I think, and I've seen leaders pulling together high performance teams. And very traditionally, what I see is they have their go-to people. Like when you're really wanting a high performance teams for something that is high risk, you need this project to be done right and get it past the finish line. You have your go-to people that you go to, but because of that, one, it's not necessarily always the most inclusive way to be bringing together teams to really get diversity of thought. And especially because when you see those same high performers coming together time after time, you start to really see that group think, not just in that project, but over the course of project after project, where it almost like manifests in itself. And so it's while it gets the job done, I don't know if it gets the job done right. So challenging leaders to really be courageous in going and taking some risk outside of their go-to high performers, taking the time to really listen to team members about where they're wanting to go in their career, their journey, how their skills are being underutilized, and using that data to then come together and help build those teams. And I agree with the comment that was made earlier that the performance management system is foundational to that. Where I see the gap is performance management systems. You have performance feedback in the conversations, but that doesn't necessarily always translate them to how we're making decisions about talent and the teams and different high performance teams we're putting together. So being really intentional about really trying to understand those journey maps on where folks have been, where they want to go, where are the strengths that they could be bringing to the table that are underutilized, and using that collectively to bring together and say, here's the things that we think are going to be a win-win for our team members, for bringing that diverse group together, for folks that maybe haven't had the chance yet, but this is where they want to go in their careers, and we'll get the job done on the projects that we have.
This is making me think of a slightly related idea, and Janet also mentioned VUCA. And when you have both volatility and chaos, crisis, as we had over the last year, it's hard to be courageous. It's hard to bust out and away from the way you've always done something, because you know that works, and your head is filled with all this other stuff that you like, all the fires that you have to put out otherwise. So when you talk about encouraging leaders to be courageous, what does that look like? Like, what can you tell them to help them feel encouraged to take those risks?
That's not what you can tell them. I think it's funny you bring this up, because we've had a lot of conversation on that. It's really, you can tell employees to be courageous. You can tell employees to really speak up, that we want to hear diversity of thought. But if they don't have that sense of psychological safety, then they're not going to. And that has to be earned over time. And it really comes to the level of trust that you have. And it comes through on your leadership, working with your leadership to really be intentional about how we create that moments of trust and psychological safety, and intentionally encouraging that behavior, intentionally encouraging it, and and recognizing and rewarding it when it happens, and in talent decisions that are made, and by showing that behavior themselves.
Well, that is a very nice segue. But before we go into these concepts of trust, belonging, and psychological safety, Casey, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I'm just so excited by this conversation. This is what we do, and I love this, like all the kind of dopamine and everything's kind of going off. So I'll try to kind of keep the answers short. But we just released a paper with a large European university the other day, kind of joint research that we did over thousands of teams. In kind of high-performing teams and motivation, it's best in small teams. It's easier to manage, and I think this kind of connects to like the concept of Dunbar's numbers. 5, 15, 50 people, 150 people, and kind of our evolutionary kind of dynamics.
And 150 is the outside, right? Yeah.
Exactly, that we can loosely understand people's names and stuff. And 5 is who we have deep emotional kind of connections to them. And I think as we're looking at teams, I think there's a correlation to that as well. Getting to the conversation about diversity, like diversity in background, diversity in experience, diversity in a lot of the things that we can see or we can measure for on a resume is absolutely fantastic. We need it from an ethical and a moral point of view, but also strategic, right? To create innovative products for different markets and for kind of more inclusive people. But because we do work with many, many thousands of teams around the world, but what we see, and I don't have it from a scientific point of view, but I have it from a lot of data, is that teams that are generally aligned by their values are more high performing. So you can have diversity of experience, diversity of thoughts, but okay, they're motivated by relatively the same things. And I think this gets into the point that Matt was talking about, kind of conflicts and the lack of understanding is, when people have very different value sets and very, very different goal hierarchies, they speak a very different language. And if I'm using a word, it's going to trigger somebody else here if we have different value sets. So I think kind of keeping the same value sets relatively, maybe a little bit of stretch here and there as you construct teams is very important to do.
I pop something in.
Yeah. Go for
that
it.
makes me think of something.
Yeah.
I wonder if, to sort of Casey's point, if you're hiring, and I think it was Janet was talking about TA, talent acquisition, how critical that is. If you put a question like Casey's, what was it? Kind heart. If you thought about your cultural foundation, your purpose, and you actually asked questions in the interview related to that, then maybe you'd be hiring people that had this common sense of values that are underpinning all of them. So even if they were an engineer and a musician and all speaking different languages from different countries, at least they all were hired based on your values.
Oh, look at all the heads nodding. Janet, what did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so it all depends on how holistic your hiring processes and your performance management processes as well, right? So, in today's fast-paced environment, results really matter, and it's very important to hit the financial targets. But, are we kind of emphasizing on the values? Right, all of the values that we mentioned, collaboration, inclusivity, agility, and all of that, right? So then that becomes the how, right? So the what is very important, and the how then becomes even more important, and then we bring the values-based performance into the whole equation. And then we have the why, right? The purpose, and that's like the guiding North Star. So if you're assessing your performance from a perspective of not only what, that's results and numbers, but also in terms of how, that's values, and the why, that's purpose, that becomes extremely holistic way of assessing performance, and therefore probably is more sustainable than just assessing in terms of how well you do in terms of numbers or results. So that's a little bit of how we have pivoted our performance management process as well.
Paul, did you want to add?
Yeah, I was really struck by that comment, because I think the most important thing before we get to making your team is to have a vision, right? You have to have a vision. You have to be able to communicate that vision. They have to understand the value of the object, right? The value of that vision. And then you need, as a leader, to foster the culture that allows people to be courageous, because I can tell you, you can be iron-fisted, you could have a great vision, but if you don't foster a culture throughout the whole organization, nobody's going to be courageous in that organization. So one example was when we were doing combat operations, and I screwed up as the commanding officer of the squadron. I would stand up first and say, here's what I screwed up this week. And I would go into detail, one, so they could learn not to do that. And two, so I could foster an environment to where they can feel free to ask questions, maybe questions I didn't think about, or, hey, I feel good about asking questions. I feel good about being courageous or going the extra mile on things. So you really got to start from the foundation, like it was already mentioned, and demonstrate the value of the object and foster a culture as a leader to where that you have that free exchange of information.
Well, and I think that goes back to the concept of psychological safety. And if I'm hearing what all of you are saying, it's up to the leader of that team to encourage and actually start lay the foundation for it, but then encourage it all the way through. But Nick, were you saying that your teams don't have actual leaders, that people are just brought together? It's not really a hierarchy. So who's responsible then?
Yeah, I was saying in our prep call, I was mentioning that. So we do have a leadership structure overall, but in our project, as a design firm, as where we're hugely project focused. Actually, it's what we do. We get new projects where we are building a new building, workplace, hospital, whatever. We quickly assemble a team that we need in order to successfully execute on that. And so you have those that are design leaders, you have technical leaders that are making sure the technical infrastructure is in place. You have an overall project manager that's looking at overall, how does this, how do we move forward from a project management perspective? And that's in addition to the overall kind of office leadership. So the leadership structure that's in place is not necessarily 100% clear like it might be traditionally in an organization where you have a project team and there's a project leader. So yeah, it's a blessing and it's a curse. I think it's actually a really good thing from a perspective of really creating that level of empowerment across the team. But it's also critical that when we start these teams, it's how we quickly assemble a team and get them up to high performance is something that we have to be ultra focused on. So having conversations up front with the team on who's being assembled into the team, the roles and responsibilities, looking at overall what they're wanting to accomplish on the project. And the leadership might change from different phases of the project, but understanding as a team collectively, how are we moving forward successfully and who are going to be playing those different leadership roles at different parts of the project that make sense. And then I think most importantly is checking in regularly and having those reflective points where you can have a really good, honest, safe conversation about what's working and what's not working. Where are we falling flat on our face right now? And where are we seeing some really great success? Where do we need to make some pivots and adjust? And so that we can continue to move forward successfully. So, when we talk about high performance teams, that's, how we operate in that is important.
This notion of empowered versus empowering is kind of adjacent to this. Am I correct?
Yeah. And, they have to have that sense of empowerment. And this is where not having a clear leadership in place can also be damaging to empowerment if it's not managed correctly, because it can be, well, who do I go to for the decision and for direction and guidance, right? And if you're not talking as a team collectively about what that looks like, because from project to project, that's going to look different. There's not necessarily a clear cookie cutter structure that you can say, this is how you follow a decision-making approach across all design projects. So you have to talk as a team to talk through what is that decision-making structure. Decision-making is actually a really big piece of empowerment from what I've seen with that. It's like if you have that figured out and people understand where they have autonomy to be able to make decisions or who they go to make those decisions, that seems to be incredibly empowering in how they're moving forward as a team.
Well, and I'm also hearing a lot about, and this is again a question for all of you. There's got to be vision. There's got to be alignment on that vision and on the shared goals. So how do you make that work when not everybody's sitting in the same room together? Paul, you were talking about the challenges of remote work. I think alignment is probably a big challenge when you're, not all like you can't put your hands in and then, rah, rah.
Is that for me?
Yes.
Okay,
Well, for
sorry.
all of you, but I'm starting with you.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm gonna have to think about that for a second.
Oh, okay. I mean, you were talking about the challenges of like, even basic stuff like not being able to read body language and
Yeah.
assess tone through email.
Yeah, right. So I'll fall back on what I used to teach my guys is brilliant at the basics, right? So we needed to perfect the way we communicate before we actually shared ideas, and because a lot of things can get lost in translation, and especially now in the digital world.
Mm-hmm.
So if we understand people's intent before we take action, I think you're going to get a lot more cooperation, because
Okay.
intent can be misinterpreted. Like I said, I abhor email because it's just a poor form of communication. But yeah, I think fundamentally we need to perfect the way we communicate before we start sharing our thoughts together. And if we can understand that, then I think it'll go a lot smoother in achieving a goal. Brilliant at the basics is what I try to preach.
Janet, you want to add?
Yeah, I think we mentioned about leadership, right? I think it's upon the leader to create that feeling of trust, the sense of belonging, and psychological safety for the team.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like pretty much role modeling, right? Once he or she role models, then the rest of the team will follow. So when the team members operate on trust, basic, right? They don't have to double guess the intention of others.
Mm-hmm.
They know that everyone is acting in each other's best interest. That feeling itself brings about a feeling of security and comfort and takes away from that stress. So, and when team members can trust each other, I think it creates that safe environment for the team. And then there's a sense of belonging, which comes with the ability to, add value. Obviously, when you're, valued and appreciated, you belong. That's normal. And then psychological safety is where you can express your ideas and opinions openly, mm-hmm. and you're confident enough to bring your, unique, authentic, and whole self to work. So is that happening? Is our leaders creating that environment? That's important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, are leaders providing, people the flexibility? That's also important in this current remote work environment, right? Are they micromanaging? That doesn't work.
Well, and that's really what I was getting at here is that, in this hybrid space in order to have people feel empowered, you can't micromanage, but there are some more traditional team leaders that feel like they need to be all up in it because you're not sitting right across from them. So how do you kind of allow that to sort of dissipate? Is there a best practice for that?
So it's actually, the culture within the organization,
mm-hmm.
the behaviors. If you want to promote a behavior, you need to reward that behavior, and you need to have consequence for the behaviors that don't, add value here, right? So mm-hmm. that's important. I know of several leaders, Lydia, who had traditional mindsets and who now have completely changed their leadership style. Because, the organization created that culture, right? They now operate on trust, empathy, which have become the key currencies, I think, in today's, remote working model.
Mm-hmm.
So when leaders appreciate, they create that environment, they don't micromanage, they're flexible. Just because teams are working from home doesn't mean that they're available 24/7. So leaders need to create healthy boundaries. So that's very important. And I think it's a combination of all of these things that makes this remote hybrid work model very mm-hmm. effective.
Nick, did you want to add?
You kind of sparked a thought. There's actually a workshop that we're preparing for now that we're going to be putting our leaders through on inclusive leadership. It's part of a series that we've just built out. We're calling it DIBS training, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. and all of our team members across the region are going through it, but then our leadership, we're putting through this inclusive leadership. And as we're designing it, we're kind of doing this exercise of what we say, what we do. Yes. What we say, so like we build, so we're very strong on our values and what we say, but do we always, let's like to take a really honest self-assessment, and are we following what we say? So you know, we build and grow and foster diverse teams. We embrace diversity of thought from all team members, and encourage it. So there's like these statements, right? These statements that that you hear quite a bit. And then on a 1 to 10 scale on a continuum, having folks kind of, each leader be able to weigh in and self-rate, so we can kind of see overall where they see themselves as a leadership team, and are they actually doing what we're saying? And I think we haven't had the workshop yet. I think it's going to be, we hope it'll be a very bold discussion that leads to then, okay, if we're not at a 10 on these different pieces, you know, if we're saying what we do, we should be at a 10 on the continuum. If we're not quite there, then what do we need to be doing? What do we need to change, and how do we do different to help create that environment and that culture? Because it does start with our leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. One last little aside before we move on to the audience Q&A, and I'm going to ask the organizational psychologists in our group this. So when we're talking about micromanaging in particular, because that was such a big challenge for more traditional leaders, even with high performers, what's the best way for a high performer themselves to push back and say, trust me, I got this? Is it as simple as that? Matt, you're smiling, so come on, give me something here.
Short answer is no, not in all cases, unfortunately. Wow, I wish I had a silver bullet. Just give you like an immediate
I try.
Oh man, it totally depends on the person. It's micromanaging. There's sort of, you gotta understand how they're gonna take the message. Mm-hmm. And there's just a time and place that the individual has to sit down and provide that message. And you got to know the person, what drives them, what motivates them, to figure out where's that little tiny crack that you can get into to convince them that you've got this. In a lot of cases, what I've noticed in my history with folks that are micromanaging are, a lot of them are high performers. And the reason they're micromanaging is because they got to where they're at super fast, and they did it their way, and it worked. And so they have high expectations. They've been very successful. And when they look downward, they think, no, I know how to do this, and nobody else can do it the same way. As opposed to setting back and going, you're not the only brilliant person in the room. There's other ways to get from point A to point B, and convincing that individual that it can be done a different way, number one. Number two, a lot of them have also been wronged in the past. That's what I've noticed as well, that a micromanager has been let down, where they tried to let someone do it and then they failed, and then, well, I'm not doing that again. So that's why I say it's it depends on the person, and sort of what got them to that micromanagement stage.
You're also making another business case for emotional intelligence and the need for it in order to deal with people like that. But yes, they are often high performers, and the fallback, as we were talking earlier, is always like, let me just do this myself because I know I'm going to get it, or I'm just going to go to these 3 people because I know they can get it done and get it done fast. And that doesn't always work. Not empowering. Okay. We are at the top of the hour, so we have a ton of audience questions. I'm going to turn this over to Steve briefly.
Thanks to all of you who are participating in the need to exceed, harnessing motivation within ultra high performance teams, and to our sponsor, Attuned. Once again, in case you missed it at the beginning of this event, I'm going to share something special we have for attendees of today's webinar. Our next monthly virtual conference happens to be next Wednesday, July 21st, and it's about Diversity's many roles, how mentors, sponsors, and allies each play a part in inclusion. Thanks to today's sponsor, we're offering a complimentary VIP ticket to everyone joining today's webinar. These are normally $149, so you'll want to grab one while you can. I placed the link in the chat again. Also, participants often ask when this wonderful discussion will be available as an on-demand video. The answer is very soon. The link will be in the email you get tomorrow, which will also have your SHRM and HRCI credit info. With all that out of the way, at this time we'll be taking questions from our audience. Lydia, back to you.
Thank you. As I said, we have a lot of really good ones, so we'll try to get to as many as we can, but I encourage you all who are thinking about questions, especially for specific panelists, please, if we don't get to you, feel free to reach out via LinkedIn or our individual websites. It's really easy to connect, and we hope that you do. First question from Mandy. This is really important because I've been getting a lot of feedback about this, through my reporting. She says, I'm on a very strong talent acquisition team. This past year, our top performers have been continuously lent out to help support other teams. The top performers are now feeling burnt out. How do you as leaders make sure burnout doesn't happen with top performers? Should we do a round robin on this? I'm sure everybody's got something to say about burnout. Casey, let's start with you.
I think it connects back to kind of your opening question is what is the difference between high performing teams and ultra high performing teams? And, I think this support and kind of managing for burnout, making sure you get enough sleep, making sure you have kind of enough emotional space to be able kind of to deal with all the pressures that come is very important. So it is a conversation that's going up, but how are companies, systematically creating space and systems to make sure that burnout isn't happening? And I don't think that's being done, across all organizations type of thing. So just to look at it much more systematically to manage that. And how can you do it not a weird way? Like, are you sleeping enough? Okay, can you show us that you've got 7 hours of sleep or 8 hours of sleep without, showing the wrist? Like, that's getting a little bit too big brother. But
people are tracking their sleep in record numbers. So I'm sure that data could be furnished. Thank you. Nick, did you want to add?
So, outside of work, one thing I do on the side is I coach my son's second grade soccer team.
Okay.
And out of the 15 or so players on the team, there's always 3 or 4 star players that I know, those are the players that when they're in, those are the ones that are going to make the goals, right? Mm-hmm. And I know that if I play them, I would love to play them every period. But I know that if I play them every period, by the 3rd period, they're going to be falling over, right? And it's the same thing at work with adults, right? It's the same thing in the workplace. It's you can't run them. It doesn't matter, COVID or no COVID. I think it goes back to the comment I made earlier that we tend to have our go-to high performers that we know that when we need to really drive high performance teams, we assemble them. We lean on them. We call it, challenging opportunities. This is a really great growth opportunity, a really great developmental opportunity, but we continue to engage them to really get to the finish line on the most difficult tasks, and that's what creates that burnout. And that's where I think being really intentional about how we're rotating that talent, how we're thinking about other talent that might be sitting on the side that has that potential or that interest or that passion to come in. Because for every team member that's feeling burnt out, there's another team member that's feeling forgotten.
Yeah.
And you have to, you have to think about that. And I think as a leadership and when I do with talent development and talent management, we have to be thinking about how we're really rotating that talent that's going to be a win-win for all the players.
The whole marathon, not a sprint adage comes to mind there. You got to make sure that you can all get to the finish line. Janet, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think Nick mentioned it very well. So I think this whole burnout thing is also coming with several things flung at us, right? The pandemic, the natural disasters. We've seen quite a few recently, right? The California wildfires, the tsunami in Hawaii, the storm in Texas, right? I mean, so many different things. And that brings a lot of complexity and work as well. So, I mean, that results in burnout. So for me, Are there, are we looking at mental health? Mental health becomes very important, as important as physical health. So what is the organization doing towards that, right? So are we kind of having employee wellness programs? Are we having employee assistance programs? That's extremely important. And when you're looking at high performers, they may need them, right? So, are you creating that environment where that support is available? That's important. And Nick mentioned about rotating. You cannot give extra tasks to your high performers only because they're high performers and they'll get it done. So that'll really burn out. So are you looking at distributing your workload depending on who can take on, what task? That kind of puts a little bit of responsibility on leaders to assess their talent and say, okay, this person may be good at this and this person is good at that, rather than the quick and easy route of going to that one person who's a high potential or high performer and giving that work to that person. So leaders need to kind of assess talent within their team and then distribute the workload, so you don't kind of result in burnout of a few people.
Right.
So a few things over there, according to me.
And we have another question that harkens back to what we were touching on with the micromanagers. High performers by nature may be intolerant of lesser performers on their team. How do managers coach them to channel those feelings in a way that brings others up, or at least doesn't create discord? And I did want to touch on the discord factor as well, because I think that's important to conflict resolution. Janet, you wanted to add to this one?
Thing that we have effectively done is that we have used these people as coaches and mentors. We have trained them and used them as coaches and mentors, so they can empathize with the other people. And once put in that position of responsibility, they change.
Okay.
And we've seen drastic changes in people when we kind of assign them that responsibility of you being coaches and mentors to others. Of course, they have to be trained themselves and coached, but because they are high performers, they understand the importance and they get on board. They have this continuous learning mindset. So we've used that a little bit to kind of get these results.
Okay. Anyone else want to add before we move on to the next one? Matt, go ahead.
I'd have, a slightly different angle from it as well to possibly consider. And it's the idea that the leader of the group has a firm grasp on what's going on, who's adding what value, and just that adage around chain is only as strong as the weakest link. Sure. A high performer is looking to see if the leader is having dialogue with that low performer and trying to alter what's going on there to be sure that there's a feeling of equity. I'm working as hard as I can. I'm getting paid XXX, that psychological contract. So-and-so is getting paid almost the same as me doing nothing. Something's uneven there. Having that leader ensure that they're targeting and having discussions with the low performer, people know when that's happening. And that goes a million miles as well.
We have another question about mistakes, and prompted perhaps by Paul talking about raising his hand and taking responsibility for mistakes. How can managers differentiate between performance mistakes that are unacceptable versus those that are worth making in the spirit of innovation? That's a tricky one, because we've got high performers that, the mantra is move fast and break things.
I think intention is probably your foundation of that discussion. So, you have somebody that is making a mistake. I had a young officer make a mistake intentionally. He broke the rules. He did something he wasn't supposed to do. And instead of hiding it, or I didn't make an example out of him, but I gave him the same equal treatment that I would have given anybody in that. But I also had compassion on him, because I thought, it might have been something I would have done at that stage. So if you have equal and fair treatment of a mistake, and you can see that people can recover from it, then I think that, it fosters a good environment to where people will take chances, be courageous, like we spoke about. And if they make a mistake, they know that it's not fatal, right? So I really wanted to emphasize things that were maybe safety of flight issues that could be fatal. Yeah, that was handled severely and it was handled consistently. But, you know, decision on a project that makes a mistake, yeah, I don't think anything should be fatal, and you should foster an environment where people feel like they can come back from that.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to add to that, Captain Paul, if you make repeated mistake after mistake, I wonder if that also, there's then, wow.
Absolutely.
Right? It's not just that you're making a mistake as you're trying to push the envelope, it's you're just one after the other.
So I had a student of mine that was making repeated mistakes, and they were more of a safety of flight type mistake for the aircraft that he was flying. They weren't a headwork mistake like a poor decision making. But the repeated mistake, I had to move that person from that position to something that flew a little bit slower. So you can apply that to any project or job. It's like, you know, hey, you've got a very valuable skill set. Maybe it's not in this project. Maybe you would be better that something's a little slower paced that has more attention to detail. And you absolutely, as a leader, you need to be able to read that as we mentioned earlier, and move that person into a position where they would flourish.
Casey, did you want to add something?
Yeah, I think just as Captain Paul was saying, it's the intentionality is the word he used, but I think the importance of separating the type of mistakes and why they occur and how they're occurring is very a needed conversation. I think organizations need to be sophisticated at that level. Is like, do you have the individual mistake on a repeated task type of thing like that? Okay, so do you have to think about how are you supporting that individual because they're making that type of mistake? Or is it a complex system and something has gone wrong that you haven't managed for, that the system hasn't thought about, but the consequences are quite dire. So you have to kind of more kind of game theory and okay, how can things go wrong, and start to understand these type of mistakes before they happen. This goes back to like NASA, and they're dealing with highly complex, systems there, and how can you handle these? Then I think the mistakes that we want to forgive are smart mistakes, an intelligent one, and these are all around innovation, and really explicitly say that we are supportive as an organization. We're willing to accept these type of mistakes, the complex systems, the individual ones about repeated expected performance type of thing, not as much, and those will be dealt with kind of differently, but it's that third category and making that very clear and explicit.
One thing that we thought about was when somebody made a mistake, we would reflect on ourselves. Was it a training issue or was it a behavior issue? And that was kind of the disqualifier for us.
And I think that's an important distinction too, that, as Casey was saying, there needs to be sort of these like larger processes and assessments in place to determine those things. Janet, you wanted to add something?
Just to add to whatever Paul said, and also Casey, right? It depends on the culture in the organization. If your culture is one of innovation, then mistakes are bound to happen. You need people to take risks. Calculated risk, but risk nevertheless. As long as that becomes opportunity for learning, that's okay. But if a mistake is repeated again, then there should be some kind of a consequence. But yeah, it depends on the culture.
Well, there's low stakes and high stakes, and you were talking earlier about shareholder value versus, the sort of more human side of a workplace culture. So that needs to be parsed out, organization to organization as well. We have a couple of questions about global high performance teams. How do you manage operating across cultures, time zones? There are actually, two. One, working on global enterprise teams. Have you noticed cultural distinctions with regard to ultra high performance teams? So one is about managing and one is about different cultural distinctions. And yes, well, Janet is the veteran of living in 5 countries. So, but I know that everybody's got something to say about this. So you can all have a turn. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think we mainly talking about cross-cultural collaboration out here, right? So if you want cross-cultural collaboration, then there are certain traits that kind of facilitate this cultural collaboration. So number one is trust, and we all spoke about trust, how important it is. it's about alignment of goals. That's very important. You know, everybody's headed in the same direction. They have the goals, the expectation, and they are kind of working towards that. That's important. Empathy, right? Empathy is very important. Everybody knows about each other's situation, and there's compassion in the team. People are aware, socially aware about each other as well. That's important. Then again, EQ, very important, emotional intelligence, and again, social intelligence. I think these are some of the traits that bring about, cross-cultural collaboration. That's extremely important, according to me.
I piggyback on Janet, the empathy piece. And as a personal example, I was fortunate enough in my previous role, I worked with IBM for 18 years. I was able to work in India for, about half a year. And the idea of empathy, and I think about really fostering high performers and high potentials, and the idea of moving them into roles outside of their domestic country to truly understand what's going on. When I was working with the India team in the US, little did I know that the electricity was going to go out every 3 hours for at least 10 minutes. It would take me 2 hours to get to work. There was no air conditioning. So I was hot and sweaty by the time I got there. There was issues with light and food and water. And to keep that all into context as they're trying to get their job done, unless you're actually there, you're not going to fully comprehend it. So that piece of empathy and trying to think about those high potentials, putting them into roles where they truly experience different cultures and countries to understand what it's like to operate in those different places, as opposed to I read it in a book.
Casey?
This is very kind of specific one and kind of a bugbear. So I'm based here in Tokyo, and as we hear kind of around Asia Pacific a lot, there's a lot of imperialism still alive and well about time zones. And, if you're in a multinational and global team, the headquarters, which often is in the West, gets to choose the time zone and orient it for their work-life balance. In Asia or other parts of the world are not. And this goes back to not feeling valued or not feeling understood or not feeling empathetic, and also well-being as well. So, for anyone in the headquarters setting up global meetings and asking for that, being thoughtful of that and trying to balance. It is complex, but that goes a long way. I think to
what time is it there, Casey?
It is now 4:15 in the morning.
AM. Yeah, I was actually going to mention that he's talk about an ultra high performer up in the middle of the night to be on this panel. Additional thoughts on this?
Yeah, and then there are weekends as well, right? So when you're looking at weekend, Middle East has Friday and Saturday as weekends. So a lot of global companies meetings get set up on Friday, and the teams in Middle East are like, okay, we need to attend that. So there goes one day of their weekend. So having that awareness of where people are and what the time zones are, what their weekends are, kind of really helps to bring this, foster this culture of collaboration.
Rolling back to motivation, we have a question about, there is a divide in my company's leadership regarding motivation. The prevailing school of thought is push people and create pressure to get results. And if people don't like it, then this is not the right job for them. What are some of the best alternatives to drive results in a metrics and profit-driven environment?
Ownership.
Ownership, okay.
Absolutely, yeah. If people don't feel like they have a ownership in the process, then there's not going to be a motivation for it. If you empower them, as we've mentioned before, and give them ownership, yes, you can hold them to a deadline, but ownership is huge. People don't feel valued if they're not given a task. And I can't emphasize that enough. If people aren't valued, there's no way they're going to be courageous. So ownership, I think, is fundamental to getting people to be motivated. You have a goal, inspire them with that goal, give them a vision, give them ownership, and then let them go.
Okay. Anyone else? Go ahead.
And align recognition and rewards to that as well. That's very important. Your reward strategy should align to that. That's extremely important, right? Adding to what you said, Paul, entrepreneurial thinking, that's very important. Empowerment, these are some of the words that come to my mind. So, and then rewards, it's very important. Recognize behaviors and reward them, that's important.
I think it's a little bit of a blunt opinion, but I think companies like that should be allowed to fail or should be encouraged to fail, right? And more people walk out the door if that person's there trying to do cultural change and the leadership is just not accepting it to go out the door. I think, there's a saying in science that, science only moves forward with funerals, right? So somebody passes away and then science can kind of go forward. I think with kind of management theory as well, it's relatively the same. As organizations die, as leaders move away, then we can go back to more kind of sophisticated, inclusive, more intrinsic motivation rather than a very simple, stick in this case, it sounds like.
Unfortunately, we had to lose Nick because there was a fire drill. So it's good that he had his mic muted, but we didn't hear it. But he had to break early. But we thank him for his contribution. And this one particular question had some relevance to what he was explaining. Our company, this is from Catherine. She says, our company is also project-based and we reinforce self-directed work team behaviors through competencies. But is there a way to measure that or do a checkup on that? So if we're just talking about competencies, how do we measure and do checkups? Any suggestions? Go ahead, Matt.
The thing that we're starting to shift towards, that I'm seeing others are shifting towards a little bit, a move away from the competency models into the more rudimentary skills, experiences, etc., that make up the actual competency. So going down a clip level to a more finite element of the competency. Competencies being something we definitely heavily relied on in the past, but slightly too complex and not enough face validity for the average business, and not easily tie. It's not as easy to tie a competency to your total reward system, your performance system, your succession system, your career planning system. Whereas if you go to that clip level lower, a skill or an experience, and you sort of measure everybody and give them a proficiency level on, let's say, I don't know, data analytics, proficiency level, and then that have every job measured on whether or not they need that particular skill and what proficiency level. Then you could do nice matching on things all over the place. So, and it's easier to measure when it's at that more rudimentary level than a competency.
Okay. Janet?
To add to what you said, Matt, I completely agree with what you're saying. I think measure people based on values. That's very important. So when you kind of measure them based on values, you make it very, very relevant. And you say, okay, these are your goals and these are the values that you will need to kind of, meet these goals. And then that becomes very relevant. People can understand that and work towards that. So I think, it's important to establish values.
This is a somewhat technical question. Are there compensation issues with high performance teams? Do they tend to leverage their scarcity in pay demands, or do they value other rewards substantially? I think everybody's going to have a different answer for this one, but that's just a thought.
I feel like it's the same as the manager that's a micromanager. I feel like everybody's motivated by different things, and I don't think that I would see all high performers motivated by money or by vacation time, or I would assume most of them, but it's a generalization, and I'm trying to think about the data that I have behind my back. A lot of them are driven by opportunities, career opportunities, because they're high performers in a lot of cases, but not all. You've got the high professional, the person that exceeds expectations regularly but they don't want to climb the hierarchy. So even that, there's this nuance about, but yeah, I would, I guess, defer to, there's no one common.
Right. Casey, the motivational expert.
and we have tens and tens of thousands of data points on intrinsic motivation, and it all kind of falls in different variation. Everybody really is a fingerprint. So we've actually found millions and millions of different kind of motivational profiles and how people's value sets all combine to drive what decisions and why they're choosing to work where they are and why they're choosing to work in the roles that they are. And it's very unique. So I think you have to understand those, as Captain Paul highlighted, as Matt just talked about right there as well. But I think the other point is it's very contextual as well. So if somebody's, driven by high altruism in a specific environment, they might do very well. But if they move to, the company who asked that last question, about very much performance and driving people as hard as you can and high competition probably and high financial needs type of things, somebody who's motivated by high altruism or high social relationships will not perform well there. So remembering that kind of contextual environment. So even though high performers have that power law ability to kind of potentially demand higher payment, the new environment is not necessarily going to be the one that's going to allow them to flourish.
All right, in the last few minutes that we have, I want to ask about conflict resolution. And what are some best practices when you have a team that is high performer and maybe they all think that their idea is the best one? How do you resolve conflicts? We've got 3 minutes to solve the world's problems.
I think for leadership, your listening is the best advice I could give as far as assessing what the conflict is. First, you got to figure out what's causing the conflict. I stepped into a squadron that we had deployed 8 times in a combat zone. We had a 62% divorce rate in the squadron, and the morale was extremely low. And we're getting ready to go back into a high performance environment in combat again. And one of the things I tried to do is figure out, all right, what are the issues? And as leadership, if you just sit down face to face, I can't foot stomp that enough. And I know with the digital environment we're in, face to face, so you can look and listen, don't speak, and read their body language, you're going to learn a lot more into resolving the conflict and put the same people in the room together. I would put the issues in the same room so they could literally see the humanity of the crisis. And I was able to resolve a lot more conflicts that way, face to face, listen, don't speak over people. And it seemed to work pretty well, at least in the military environment that I was working in.
Okay, Janet, other thoughts?
So yeah, I think Paul covered quite a bit. So for me, getting the parties together and helping them arrive at a common goal and enlist the benefits of working with each other as a team can help mitigate the situation. But having said that, I also think that not all conflicts are bad, right? There are productive conflicts that can bring out the best in each other. So productive conflicts happen when the teams have the freedom and the ability to challenge each other and the maturity to challenge each other for better business outcomes. So yeah, so it's a bit of both.
Okay.
I want to add just really quickly, the forming, norming, storming, just the idea that when a group is first getting together, don't necessarily assume, oh gosh, they're all arguing and this is never going to work. And oh my goodness, at the beginning of any team that's just getting together, there's going to be this storming until you figure out the rules of the road. That's just common. All teams go through forming and they create some norms. They do some storming. Like this is just team composition 101.
Got it. And Casey, want to add final thoughts?
I thought it was fantastic. I was learning, I was enjoying the stories and everybody fundamentally doing. I think kind of my biggest takeaway from today is just the need for reflection. And I think the importance of creating that space for high performers within organization. And that's where it's going to drive more performance. And I think it's going to drive more empathy as well. So that just key about reflection in the space and the importance of that.
All right, well, I think that we are right at the bottom here. So thank you all for joining me. This has been a fantastic discussion and I'm honored to have met all of you. I'll turn it back over to Steve.
Thank you, Lydia. I couldn't have said it better. That was a great conversation. And as a team, you definitely lived up to the topic and the title. Thanks again to our sponsor, Attuned, and to all of you for participating today. If you'd like to join us for more virtual events, you can head to our website, fromday1.co, and check out more of our upcoming webinars. I'll name a few before we sign off. On Tuesday, July 13th, we'll be looking at recruiting in the vast labor pool created by remote work. On Thursday, July 15th, we'll be talking about the future of telehealth in a post-COVID-19 world. And on Wednesday, July 21st, as we've mentioned, we'll be doing our monthly full-scale virtual conference with panel discussions, workshops, and networking. The focus is on diversity's many roles, how mentors, sponsors, and allies each play a part in inclusion. Visit our website at fromday1.co to learn more. Thanks, everyone, and stay well.